This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us at the Technology Review Council. My name is Novo Manna, and I'm the CEO of Collective HR Solutions. And we're very, very pleased today. And I'm taking a slightly off pattern. I get to be the presenter as well as the host. So, but I want to give a lot of credit, and I will do so very shortly, about the team that's put this together. So we're going to be talking about our HCM Diagnostic Assessment. So this is a service that our team has put together, and I think you'll find it somewhat, I think, timely, and I'll talk a little bit about why we feel that. What I am seeing an awful lot of from our prospects is that they are getting phone calls from vendors directly and saying, hey, are you thinking about a new system? And if so, let me give you a demo. And before you know it, you've got a contract sitting on your desk and going, wait a minute, what happened? And quite literally, I'm seeing that because of, I want to say, the lack of conferences over the last couple of years because of COVID. And if you will, a reluctance to answer RFPs. And I find that interesting, but probably makes sense. But many of the vendors today are just saying, hey, I've got a solution, let me go present it to you, and that's it. And we feel very, very strongly that the process that we've taken over the many years of developing our evaluation process is a pretty strong one that starts out with just business requirements. This particular service sits in front of that process. In fact, we've created this service not to take us to a technology conclusion, but quite the opposite. It's really much more of a diagnostic. What is your status? What are things happening in your world, and how are they being received by your clients, if you will? And so that's what we're going to cover today. Our agenda, we're going to just talk a little bit very quickly about our team, why we've done this, and a little bit, I gave you a preface on that, and then we'll dive into the process itself, because we want to show you what goes into it, what comes out of it, which is probably the most important of that, and if you will, get your reaction to it, because we think that, we've given this a couple of times of tries in trials and so on, and that seemed to be very, very important for us to do, but you're the real crowd that we're talking to, and we feel that would use this process. So let us know how you're feeling about it. Again, put the questions in the chat. So let me present our team. Amy, as you can see, is here and projecting a picture, which is great. I appreciate that. So Amy, Dan Vanderhey, myself, Mike Benson, Tim Corcoran, Patrick Seed, and one of the gentlemen, Keith Nichols, who is not here today. All these folks have put a lot of time into the process of designing and creating the service itself. And you'll see when we talk about the service, that there's some tools sitting behind that. So I wanted to say thank you to them for the outstanding, shall we say, depth of knowledge and experience that they brought to the table. I want to say, I hate to say it this way, but there's over 100 years of experience on that slide alone. It's kind of probably scary, and then it's not all attributed to me, so let's put it that way. So let's talk a little bit about our solution. So the service is allowing us to provide the workforce insights through some data analytics. And I want to say up front, we've kind of come to some terminology that I want to introduce and stay with that. And that is, most of the things we see these days is all about employee experience, employee that, maybe we'll go to the Catnan experience, whatever. When we talk about this, we really talk about the workforce, which really includes not only employees, but interns, contractors, and candidates. These are people that are trying to get into the workforce or working in there, but they're not formally the employees. And we feel very strongly that this is an important aspect of what we've tried to do, is round out so that we're talking about the workforce. We really are talking about tying the programs you're offering as HR folks and the workforce's needs. In other words, are they in sync with one another? We also are trying to understand, are our SAP practices aligning with corporate culture? And you'll see a lot of slides in here, and that's why I'm going to send the slides out with the video, because there's a lot of background information that goes into great depth of what supports this service. But what we're trying to do is really maximize the programs you're offering and the technology supporting it to effectively hit the workforce. So the diagnostic actually provides a very strong line of sight into the systems and processes you're doing. And you'll find very quickly that we have a very strong partner, Pendolino Group. We'll talk a little bit, in fact, you will see them in 2 weeks as a follow-on about how processes and operational procedures, if you will, are a very important part of what it is you do to deliver your programs. And I won't steal their thunder, but I think you'll find that to be very entertaining as well. They have some excellent tools and some great knowledge to bring to the table. So we see this HCM Diagnostic as bringing a precursor at the very front of pretty much anything you're trying to do in changes of both culture, HR programs, and upgrading, shall we say, the types of things you're offering out to your workforce. We provide a very visual interpretation, and we'll show you the diagnostic output, and you'll see how that kind of aligns with a very quick recognition of where things are working and where things are not. And it actually allows you to do more of a prioritization about where to spend your time and your money. And like I said, this is not leading you to a technical solution. It could be a lot of different options that come from this. So, like I say, from a leadership standpoint, it really puts some insight into the workforce. From a managers and supervisors, we are looking at things that gives an evaluation about how do I manage my units? What is being provided to me as an HR program that is really allowing me to manage the goals of the organization. As HR professionals, this diagnostic allows you the tools to evaluate the needs of the workforce. And the workers themselves have an opportunity to express their perspective of whether or not the experiences they're engaging in when they're dealing with the HR-related items are effective. And I felt very strongly that, in all honesty, the technology that you present at the end of the day is sometimes a reflection of your culture. And we see many times that the culture and the technology do not jive, if you will. So that being said, we are in a multi-phased approach. So we are going to talk about just phase one in this session, and that is this diagnostic. But again, once we get into phase two, and as I mentioned earlier, our very dear partner, Pendolino Group, who you hear again 2 weeks from down the road, use both their operational experience and their general knowledge and a tool called Process Pro, which is a very interesting and probably a very dynamic product to use in looking at various processes. We find quite often that processes are more the problem than the system, and yet the system gets blamed quite often for failures. So again, that's a key thing. At the end of both of those phases, you end up with a very clear roadmap of where to spend the time and money and efforts of both HR, IT, senior management, and others. And it allows you to truly optimize the entire perspective of what you're offering to your workforce in terms of HR programs. So we went to, I would say, a great length of time, and the team would probably be nodding their heads in the background when I say this. We spent a lot of time trying to understand what we need to measure and what we're trying to accomplish at the end of this. So we believe, as I mentioned, that it's a composite workforce needs to be considered when you're talking about the worker life cycle. That is a very important part of what we designed. We basically understood too that the vendors or the technology supporting HR these days is very much in alignment with that. If you look at the various HR suites out there, they are all allowing interns and contractors and so on to be accounted for in the workforce. They may not be paid for that, they may not even be counted in some cases, but they are accessible as part of the workforce. And like I say, it allows the diagnostic and the technology to kind of merge together. It allows you to leverage all this workforce directions into a particular singular direction on your company. So a little action there, but we've tried to deal with this on a couple of perspectives of what we're doing in the worker life cycle. Everything from the pre-boarding, onboarding, engagement, and if you will, the outcome of that. So let me talk to you a little bit about what we think to be our framework. And again, we're looking for questions, and Amy and Patrick, please keep me honest out there. But we started out by talking about the worker life cycle domains. Now, there's a lot of information. I'm going to bring it up on the screen, but I'm not going to read it. But you will have the deck in your hands. But we felt that starting with workforce planning, and in a sense, cycling through the whole staffing of the organization, how we recruit them, how we reward them, how we train them, how we measure them, creating a leadership development and succession management, collaboration, which is very much the communities and inclusion and so on. Data analytics and business insights brings us back around. And we felt that these domains really did represent the worker life cycle. Now, in terms of what's the cursor here, there we go. So here's the explanation of each of those life cycle work domains. And again, I want you to realize that what we did was we talked about this in the constructs of the workforce. And I'll let you guys read that at your leisure. But so what we are seeing in this situation of the worker's life cycle, we then took a step back and said, okay, so how are our HR technology domains set up? And we came up with these perspectives. We have core HR, we have talent management, we have time management. We feel that it's very important these days, benefits, and payroll. But we did not leave everything else out of that. So if you look below there, we have a governance structure, the technology stack, and the data structure, the compliance that has to be in the world of human resources, which is literally across all of these areas, and also the data and analytics and business insights. So again, there's a significant amount of perspective and information behind these technology domains. But what we're trying to say is, what do we need to measure, and what do we have the information to measure? And so this is kind of where your programs and your technology kind of meld together, in the sense that we are looking for ways to tell you, where are you doing a great job and where is your workforce not feeling you're working that way. So I'll pause at a moment. Amy, any questions so far?
No questions in the chat just yet.
All righty, thank you very much. Okay, so here's further dialogue on those domains. And again, what is contained in those are, I think, pretty thorough. As you go through the presentation or go back to the deck, I'd love to invite you to come back to us and say, hey, you missed this, or what about this, or even just have a dialogue with us about how we work through this process. So our process really is put together in these phases. We have a discovery phase, we have a survey phase, we gather the information and analyze it, and then we produce the results. So what is within the concepts of each of those phases is that in the discovery, we really want to go talk to all the key stakeholders that you can point out to us. So in other words, access to the C-suite. We found quite often that if the C-suite is in the same room, facilitating a conversation, quite often there are surprises, and even the C-suite going, I didn't know we were doing that. And so we really want to make sure that what we're guiding and what we're doing this is in the constructs of the business objectives, the strategic perspectives that this organization has. We want to make sure that everybody understands those HR domains and the workforce and so on. And I'll show you more in this much more detail. But then we move to the survey phase, where we're really going out there, and we are suggesting that our clients really start at the top if possible. In other words, do a top-down perspective on where things are working and how this survey works. And I'll show you in the more detail how we can divide up the data. But really, it's measuring the quality of the HR services being provided, and how important are they to the people that are receiving those services. And you'll see when I talked about the population being leadership, HR itself, the manager, supervisor level, and the employees, you can find that there are, in some cases, vast differences in both the value of that and how important it is to them and how it's being delivered. So the data that we gather from this process is analyzed. And like I said, I boast about it, but that 100 years of experience plus, they are all brought to the table when we get the data from our clients. In other words, it is not my opinion, not a single interpretation from one of our consultants. It is this group that gave rise to the service. And literally, the perspective that we have there is that there's not an answer that comes from this per se. The survey shows a lot of diversity, if you will, in all the categories we're measuring, but it's really taking a step back and using the knowledge, the experience that we represent, along with sitting down with our clients, that really allows us to analyze better what the results really say. And so we present our results back to our client with a very strong visualization and some very strong data sitting behind that. So that's the process we go through to go through the assessment. So I'm going to give you some examples. Again, it's an eye chart and it hurts like heck to see it, but we have put a lot of thought into the process where we have designed the survey. We've given it a sense of ease of filling it out. In other words, we're asking people, here's some questions we're asking you. Please fill in these categorizations. Give us a score, if you will, within those categorizations, and then let it go, and we'll take care of all the analysis and data gathering of that. So what I think the key things that we want to show in this particular thing is that we're asking for you to give us your email, and there's a reason behind it. And then people would be, well, I'm not sure I want to give my email if I'm, you know, a manager at a level and I'm criticizing HR. Well, the honesty of this thing is very important, and because we keep the data back in our place, like I call it every SaaS vendor, they have a lot of client information, but they don't break through and say, here's the individuals who talk to this. They give back aggregate information. But this really is to do two things. On a company basis, we're asking people, who are you? Certainly the company you're representing. We're doing one of these at a time, but I'll go back to that in a moment. When did you give us this? And what is the role you're playing? So in other words, I might be able to fill this as a manager, and I may turn around and fill this out from an employee, and I may have different results I'm giving you because as an employee, I feel this is lacking, but as a manager, I needed this. This was much more important. That's a very valuable attribute, and I'll show you when we get to the data how that does roll out. So the roles of the individual are part of the questions that we're asking. Now, what we've said to folks is, okay, on a scale of whatever the case is, tell us whether or not you think this falls in these kind of graduation. So the maturity of the level, how is this being delivered? Is it, you know, in its infancy, is our candidate recruiting still immature? It's just not as well rounded out. It doesn't seem to be finding the right people, or is it very optimized? And then also, how important is that function to what you, who you are? Again, I'm going back, if I was filling this out as a manager, it might be very important. Or I don't have much turnover, so I don't get to hire people very often. It's not that important. And so you have a degree of perspective of different dimensions of how HR programs are being received and whether they're valuable to them. So this, again, here's another eye chart, but literally what we do is we take all the questions that have been asked, we score them based on the levels of the individual, how they're represented in the population that I mentioned earlier, and the aggregate, so that when we go back to our client, we are able to show to anybody who asks, but let's say our client, our contact, here's what your company looked like in survey across all of it. And then we can start breaking it down into the different levels, maybe even the position. So maybe IT feels that they've got a great technology and the programs are there, but HR programs are so-so. So there's a lot of good information that comes out of these processes. And like I say, we can kind of slice and dice that information into some very, very key perspectives. Does this unit feel this way? Does this manager feel this way? Do the levels of managers, do employees that feel that way? So there's a lot of ways to drive this, but we've accounted for the fact that it's going to be, it could be corporate wide if that's what you choose to do. So I hope this is what we call the aha slide, but the idea of this is we have gone back again to the domains that we talked about, and i.e. the programs that are offered by HR, against the fact that it is mature and how important it is and what is the gap. And literally what this chart is saying on the left side of this chart is quite literally, in this particular example, succession management and data analytics are, if you will, not mature. They're not really even being done well based on the survey results. And when you look down here in terms of the importance, the most important thing that was out there is data analytics. And so you look at it and say, if I were going to concentrate, that's probably where I would suggest that you take a hard look at what kind of analytics are you providing, because apparently out there, your workforce as a whole feels very strongly that's an important part. On the right-hand side is what we call the visualization, and it's pretty telling, but in the case of these radar maps, if everything was working perfect, there'd be one big circle out there with everything matching. But as you can see, even in this that supports the data, the succession situation is out of sync and the analytics is out of sync in terms of the widest gap between the green circle of what things are considered to be the importance level versus how well are they delivered. So this is kind of the end product of the process, but getting there is a lot of dialogue, a lot of analysis, a lot of discussion, and if you will, now some very strong data. This is all backed up on the aggregate with all the individual responses we've gotten. And you can, like I say, you can cut it lots of different ways. So I'm going to pause at that moment and say, Amy, are there other questions out there?
Yes, we do have a question from Roy. Do you
Please.
gather info only through the surveys, or do you also measure data within the HCM?
So we've relied on the survey to give rise on this one. So I think, you know, you're touching upon something I would say I would take as an extension of certain things. So for example, and I don't want to again steal the thunder of anything that might come from the Pendolino group in 2 weeks, but the idea of operational processes may be giving rise to the problem that you have. In other words, the system's accepting data, but if you're not doing a data audit to look at the integrity of the system put in, i.e. the process, the data entry thing, that could be a problem. So to your point, there are tools that would come out of the HCM world that would allow us very strongly to see, you know, hey, this is a failure here, and this is not the system, it's a process problem. So I'll even ask Roy, if you don't mind unmuting, did I answer your question or not? Did you have some other thoughts on that?
Yeah, excuse me. The thought that I had that was that some people in certain circumstances may not be completely forthcoming with information in a survey if they feel threatened. That management will, you know, clean house, whatever.
So I think it's one of those things that in all surveys, you always run that risk that you're going to get some outlying comments. And I will show you in the next slide, so I'll leave it at this way. What we would say to you as let's say if you are a contact in this organization, we are going to keep the aggregate data. So we're not going to share with you the individualized. Now, certainly if I say, here's the CIO's responses, you're going to know exactly who that guy is. But we're going to analyze it and we're going to try to protect the privacy of the individuals. But I think this is like every good survey. You have comments. And so, and thanks for the lead in on that, Roy. I think this is exactly where people can, in their honesty, put forth some very telling and perhaps some constructive comments. If people are looking for this as a way of kind of quote unquote getting back, surveys are not a good way to do it. I would say that if there are indications of somebody as an outlier, I'd go out of my way to maybe go in and talk to them. And again, as a consultant, you can kind of come in and ask more pointed questions without retribution, if you will.
No, may I jump in?
Oh, please, Mike.
Yeah. So, yeah, great question, Roy. I think One of the beauty of this tool is we'll have many different ways that we can gather information. We can do it through a discovery process where we're interviewing, leadership in certain areas, or we can simply put this out on the through a survey, which is accessible via the internet. But to your question about how can we leverage data within the HR system, I think that's valuable. We could certainly say, for example, that maybe the survey and the discovery process reveals that a particular function, say, I don't know, performance management, rates, high in terms of gap between its the process being mature and whether or not it's important to the organization. But yet the data show, perhaps by how many people have accessed that particular function, that data, that may contradict what we find out in the survey or through the discovery process through a series of interviews. So I think that would be a good idea for us to, merge. Merge isn't the right word, but to bring those two things together. What we find out in discovery, what we find out through survey, and what we find out by actually analyzing the data. I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
There's a technology called process mining technology that does just that. It analyzes the data in your systems and derives the processes from the data rather than asking.
In other words, go away from what the vendors provided. No, thanks for the question, Roy, and thank you, Mike, for jumping in on that one. So let me move over to a little bit of the end process here. So like I said, we've gone through the process of gathering the data, surveying the folks, analyzing it, and then providing the graphical and data representation. We feel pretty strongly that this is kind of data-driven decision-making, if you will, because we are looking at people's responses. It is analyzing the data coming from lots of different sources. To Mike's point, we can certainly take a look and say, performance management is rated high and very important, but nobody seems to be doing the job and nobody's accessing, they're doing it on a spreadsheet or whatever. I think there's an awful lot of perspective that says adoption, to me, is the metric that we should be measuring ourselves whenever we put a new system or new program in. It's not that the fact that it works and it was tested, it's who's using it and are they using it, period. And so these are the kind of things that would probably come as an output of this as well, is validating what we think that gap looks like and why did we show a gap in that area. So anyway, so like I say, that's the service it is as it's designed to do. I would ask, and I'll say it this way before I launch this one, we would like to, for the Technology Review Council, provide, I'm going to put a small limit on it, but I'll just say the folks that call us or contact me, if you will, and you'll see that in the next slide, we'd like to be able to do something like that for free. And I say that because I would limit it to maybe at the top senior level, 5 people answering some questions, but giving you the insight of what the both process gives you and maybe a valuable return from just the process of doing that. And as Michael has said, we don't need to necessarily send out the survey. We can do this through an interview. So if we were doing 5 people at the top or 5 major stakeholders, you wanted to hear their impressions, we're happy to do that on an interview style, which is sometimes gives us that opportunity. We're putting in the comments they're giving us, if you will, and asking these questions and putting the scores in for them. But sometimes a dialogue with people is much better than just a survey, as Mike pointed out.
Yeah, no, if I could add to that, so who would be good candidates for this? I think if you implemented a solution, a new HR system in, say, the last 6 months, it should be a good opportunity for you to kind of test the efficacy of the solutions that were implemented against what was originally sold, right?
Exactly.
And what you approved your effort on. Or if you're a new leader within an organization and you want to take a pulse of the effectiveness and importance of your solutions that are being deployed through your HR system, I think this would also be a good tool to use as well. just to give you a pulse of what it looks like within your organization. So something to think about.
No, I think it's a very good point. And in fact, as I said earlier, this is really not to lead you to a technological solution or change. This could be used at any time given any circumstances. So in other words, let's say we're all involved with DEI in some fashion. So we launch a new program, we put dashboards in front of managers and we say, hey, by the way, here are our DEI goals. And they're saying that's wonderful. And 6 months later, you're not meeting the goals and you're finding that people are really not paying any attention to it. Again, this is a great way in which you can gather that data and see if our program is matching what we think it's doing, but it's not being used or it's not very important for people. Well, there we go. That's the kind of stuff that maybe it's more communication, or maybe you need to redesign the program or what you're providing to the managers. So this is not, like, say, a way to change up the technology, but rather get a better read on the programs and the processes you're putting in place, and are they being delivered well, and are they important to the population? When in the many times we've been in front of our prospects and we ask questions, so where do you think your pain points? They've invariably say, well, the system does this and we need that. And I keep saying that again, it's not always the system that is at fault. It's more our delivery, our process, even our communication of what we're asking to be done. Amy, any other questions out there?
Michelle has a question. Does
Sure.
measurement of adoption include how stakeholders are utilizing the data, not just if they are using the system?
I would say the answer is yes to that, but I'm going to stretch that a little bit. And Michelle, as always, you've got a great questions in there. I think when we're talking about, are they really using it well? If they're using the let's say data analytics as the example, if they are using it and they're using it for reports that are being produced for them, that's one thing. But if they're actually saying, hey, I've got a reporting mechanism, I'm asking for these things, I'm looking at other things, to me, it says maybe what we should be doing is upping our game to provide the service to our managers that's a little different than producing a report. Now you're going to steal my thunder a little bit down the road. At the end of August, we will see something that is going to be very geared from another vendor that's all about the data, the integrity, and its value before you even go to the analytics. So I'd say stay tuned, but you've asked a very good question. Again, the data is there, people are getting reports, but they're not using it quite the way. And so maybe what you need to do is provide an analytical opportunity for them to do their own reports, if you will. There's lots of products out there, but it's allowing that manager to say, I love the value of the data you're providing to me is great, but I want to go deeper. Can I do that? And there's probably a very good chance that you can accomplish that. So I hope that kind of answers the question, Michelle, I believe, I hope. If not, please tell Amy no. Any other questions sitting out there?
No other questions. Feel free to unmute, ask your questions.
Please do. And I would say, I mean, we've got quite a bit of time here. I guess I kind of dashed through there. I would love to hear people's perspective. Again, there's been some time that's gone into this thing from the team. We've all been very, very strongly believing that this is the right thing to do. But I'd love to hear your impressions. I mean, again, some of the questions being asked are perfect, but I'd love to hear, okay, how do I use this? Why would I use it? And so on. So, Roy, please go ahead.
So what does the service cost, and how long does it take, and who is the audience that you're selling to?
So cost is going to be the size of the survey. And so we've kind of pegged that out, and I'll kind of hold back on the exact cost on that. But let's just say that if I were going to do it for senior management of, let's say, maybe 10 people, it's going to be somewhere around $100 per person to do that. I have to say it this way, it is very relatively cheap. Now, if sending out the survey is what you're going to do, that is that kind of baseline. If you want us to interview folks, there's a little bit more time that goes into the cost of that. But it is really more of a volume situation as opposed to, if you will, I want to say any other factor. As far as how long it takes, again, sending out the survey, if you've got a well-tuned organization that is used to getting surveys internally, then it could take maybe a couple of weeks, and that's it. If we're doing the interviews and scheduling and trying to do all that stuff, and it's a wide audience, it's a matter of, could be months. But again, I think our perspective is you're better off trying to start at the top or go to major stakeholders as you think are problematic for the things you're trying to offer, and concentrate on those. You may find that as you go further out and spread out in the population, they're corroborating exactly what you got out of the small group, and you can say, let's just stop right there, stop serving, let's go take action. And like I say, this is a multiple phase, so it's not just a survey, it's looking at the processes, the programs, how they're delivered, communication, etc. And then you can set up with a roadmap for how to approach what you're hearing and seeing in the survey.
I think, no, this is Mike. I think also it's important to point out that the way the tool is put together now is we have a series of statements and questions for each of the domains. And I think kind of the core product, there are about, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's about 120 different statements and questions that are being asked. But in the process of having this discussion with you to determine the extent that you want to deploy this, the tool is flexible enough that we can, with your input, customize the questions or statements that you'd really like to focus on in any particular area. It could turn out that in the area of, say, leadership development, the questions and statements that we've come up with may not be particularly applicable to your organization. And so through a process of discovery, we could work with you to customize those questions and statements that you would really like to survey and get your organization's input on. So there's flexibility there as well.
That's a really good point, Michael. And I neglected to mention that we can and would tailor those questions to both two things. Number one, what you call your employees may be some other term, you know, you're our people or whatever the case may be. So we want to tailor this so that it's more, it's asking the questions that are in the vein of your culture. Let's start with that. So that's part of that flexibility. And then to your point, maybe this is not an important kind of a question, but I'd like to replace that with something else. So we can shorten that domain question. We can lengthen it if you feel it's even deeper. It's really, to Michael's point, let's make sure that we're addressing what we feel to be the important things you want out of this. Now, you'd ask the question, Roy, who are our primary contact? We feel pretty strongly that that is the CHRO, but we've had some conversation with CIOs where they're saying, we're delivering all this stuff and we're getting lots of people complaining about our system. And again, I go back to that's the age-old thing. It's a system problem. We got to switch to a new one. Again, this could help that situation greatly.
Yeah.
But I think it also speaks very, very strongly, and I'm seeing that a lot in the benefits area, where benefits today, the standard things being offered, are not meeting the needs of the population being served. And there's some and many of you have seen some things, even here in the Technology Review Council, presented that are very different. Mental health on a telemedicine or teleplatforms, support pay, divorce processes. I mean, just a lot of different things that many people are not aware of or don't know how to go about offering it. And yet the population is saying, we need that. We need that flexibility. So like I said, there's just a lot of things. I would not recommend segmenting the survey to only address a couple of domains. I think you're better off served looking at the entire domain world and getting feedback, and maybe none of them are problems, and that's even great.
Yeah, but despite that, I think it's important that when we engage with folks on this is to understand what life cycle the organization is in. If they're a relatively new company and they're growing, and I think we'd be more interested in wanting to know what the gap is in their recruiting and onboarding processes and supporting technologies than they would be, say, in their performance management. So that's
Yeah.
something else we would take into consideration when we engage with you.
Yeah, and to that point, Michael, as we said, our phase one is a discovery, to talk to you as a company, as a person, and see culture, needs, perspectives, maturity of your organization. Where do you think your important areas are? Like I say, putting a survey out there and asking across all the domains only adds more wealth to the data. Some of those things you can see right off the bat. You're delivering what the organization needs at this time. Great, let's put those aside. But again, the idea is that the survey, and to that earlier point of, it's not when you just put in a new system in that, or 6 months afterwards or whatever. You can do this anytime. So you could say, I think, we're a year into this kind of plan. Let's go back and talk to the people in the same way. And we've got now data. As I mentioned, we ask about who the company is. We expect over time, as we gain more and more clients in the data, if you will, we will be able to come back, and when we have this dialogue, say, here's what we're seeing in companies, your size, your industry, maybe your maturity in general, of the things that they're addressing, without naming who those people are. We're just saying that there are trends to be taken out of the data on this multiple client situation. So we feel pretty strongly that there serves a purpose for us and to you about what's going on as a trend in the HR technology space. So as we get more and more clients doing this, we'll have better data in which to shall we say, benchmark some things. Other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Could this typically lead to an evaluation of some sort, or an assessment as to, an action plan?
It could. And what's interesting is, Roy, you and I are in the business and we've been friends forever, but how many times have we gone in and we said, well, we need to fix payroll? And it turns out that payroll's the back end of things that are, if you will, badly input and processed at the front end. And so when somebody says, I'm going to ask you to help me just do my payroll system, it might be just payroll. It might be your time system, for all I know. It's the ability to assess this. So to your point about a technical evaluation, this may help you to point out that you have a function that is fairly messed up and needs to be addressed, or here's a missing problem in succession planning. I get that a lot of, can you help us find a succession planning? Because our system doesn't do that. Okay, so do we need to replace everything? No. Do we need to replace one area? Possibly. So to your point, it can lead to a technical evaluation at the end of the day as well.
Okay.
Any further questions? Like I say, feedback. This, you know me well enough. When I ask feedback about the other vendors, here's your chance to give us feedback on whether or not the relevance of this particular service. Do you feel that has some value to you? Tell me your general feelings. So please do so.
Michelle?
Hi, how are you guys doing? I do definitely think that there's value to this service. So whether or not you're looking to implement a new technology or do a business process review, or just simply have a baseline of your business, I think that these conversations are important to have them structured and making sure that you're engaging the right stakeholders. And that's not typically a skill set that an organization possesses, or if they do, they don't necessarily have as much experience to make sure that they're asking the right questions or measuring the right things. So, having worked with a number of clients who have evaluated different technologies, I think that this is a good starting point for sure. But I think I can see relevancy for processes or baselining or business process reengineering, those types of things as well.
Exactly. And I think because the team really tried to come up with this, I'll call it a framework for lack of a better term, but the domains of both the workforce and the HR programs and the technologies backing it up. I'd love to hear your impressions when you get the deck in your hands and maybe go back and review the session. I'd love to hear if we missed something, or do you agree with it? What's been kind of a problem for me as time goes on is that the terms around functions keeps changing, but they all still mean the same. And I'd love to see, in fact, I'm going to charge IRM as our partner in this process to think about maybe coming up with some standard terms, if you will, for some functionality. I don't think we'll be able to convince the vendor community to adopt this, but when we do things like that, and we talk about, I mean, is it recruiting? Is it talent acquisition? Is it talent management? What are we calling it today? We keep changing the name, but it doesn't change the problem. So that's my perspective.
I mean, I'll definitely take a look at the deck, but the two things that really stood out for me as I was listening to this was, first of all, just the acknowledgement that this goes way beyond just choosing a technology, right? Like the technology is the tool that enables all of your processes and your success. So you need to have that baseline. But the other thing that I see that you're focusing on is the maturity of the organization. And again, with several of my clients, what I've noticed is that when you're talking to a vendor, they're looking at dimensions of size, organization, footprint, but they're not looking at that dimension of how mature is the organization. So what solutions do they best need to be able to continue to offer and improve their processes. So those are the two things that I really appreciate about what you've shown here.
Well, thank you very much on that. And I would say you just made a huge friend of Michael Benson. He and I, way back when we did one of our first presentations, we talked about the maturity. It was funny that we found that some startups would never be touched by some of the vendors because they're too small. And yet they had a tremendously complex compensation plan and employment agreements and all kinds of stuff, almost to the rate that they would have that same need to, you know, track stock options and equity positions and all that stuff, like a large company. And people, to your point, they keep looking at size of company. What I am seeing in the vendor world, which I think is pretty doggone thrilling, is a usage question. Can I charge you for usage of a product and the usage of a benefit and so on? So I think this idea of size of company doesn't really relate to maturity. So thank you for your comment. Appreciate it. Any other questions or perspectives? Again, we are always open when we get these technology review councils to simply say, at the end of the day, here's the video, but we're looking for feedback at any time. And I know the vendors that we present are constantly looking for it. So we may be starting some kind of survey polls at the end of our sessions just to see some general sense of what the audience has felt. So again, if there are no other questions, I'll give you back 9 minutes of your life to go have lunch or whatever the case is, or call your day. Again, thank you all very, very much for attending, and I certainly appreciate the questions and the attendance. And we'll see you in 2 more weeks with Pendolino Group presenting their side of the process question. So thank you all. Take good care.
Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.